We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil. Bryce, thank you so much for joining today. I think naturally, with everything that's gone in the last week or so, we're going to have to start with how are you and how is America dealing with the death of Charlie Kirk?
Well, I'm personally having a rough time with it. Charlie was a friend of mine. I served on one of his boards, and got to know him fairly early in his sort of meteoric rise, and got to help him with some of his early security concerns. He was getting attacked in airports and things like that. We had some friends in common. I was working as a consultant for several other conservatives who were starting to get attacked, and I got to know Charlie personally at a pretty deep level, and got to be on the inside of the organization and kind of his inner circle of supporters, and of course participated in many of the events and contributed to the organization. So for me personally, I mean, this has been a reeling and real just time of shock, and still it's hard to get my mind around. I think America is mourning at large, not just the people who appreciated Charlie, but the millions of people that got to know him because of this. His views on every platform are up dramatically. There's people who had, not been aware of him that, might have been even Democrats or liberals or consider themselves more left, are getting to know Charlie and who he was, and I think it's opening a lot of eyes. But I think everybody's been affected by this.
Definitely. I mean, I think, speaking for a lot of Brits, Charlie Kirk was, especially the more conservative Brits, was definitely very influential. I think for me personally, being a relatively young man and Charlie Kirk being a young man, he's a great person to follow in the sense of great morals, great principles, and in the current world of just social media and what you see, there's not that many good influencers out there who practice what they preach. A young man married with kids, and I think it was, that alone is so sad. And add on to the fact the impact he's had on so many young people, it's really really such a sad day. What happened on that day for listeners who are unaware? I know for a lot of people they have woken up to the news that Charlie Kirk, a conservative commentator, has died. What actually happened on that day, and how did it all transpire?
Yeah, so I mean, this was an assassination. Charlie was speaking at it was a Utah college campus, and which, Utah is a fairly conservative state, and, not one that you would, expect this kind of danger. It's not one, I think, that people, were maybe on the same concern spectrum of. It's not Berkeley. It's not, colleges that we would expect violence at, although Charlie got plenty of that. He got plenty of death threats all over. So, none of that was taken for granted, but it was sort of an unusual place for something like this to happen. And a shooter, and there's all kinds of reason for people to consider the possibility of a larger, broader plot here. But right now, as it stands, the FBI is telling us it was, one lone shooter on one of the roofs of the buildings nearby who took a average hunting rifle and shot Charlie. He took a round to the neck. It was a pretty traumatic injury immediately, and appeared to be a immediate death. Based on what you saw, there were that day, all of us were hoping. I mean, once I saw the video, it was hard to believe that he survived it. but I do believe in miracles. But the footage of it was graphic. It was horrible. It showed him kind of immediately drop, and tremendous amount of blood loss immediately. So it was pretty hard to believe that he survived that. I received a text message, and I'm about 5 hours away from that campus, living here in the Boise, Idaho area. But it was, I received a text message from kind of our inner circle thread that we have that Charlie started for us, called Fight for America. And, we've got about, 12 or 15 people on that include just, a couple of his close personnel, and then some fellow board members and friends, and kind of that inner tight circle of influencers. And the text was from our pastor, Rob McCoy, and Rob just said, "Please pray for Charlie. He was shot in the neck in an event in Utah." And immediately I passed that out to people that I knew, and kind of our circle of believers and Christians, to just, hey, please pray for Charlie. But when everything was silent after that, and we weren't getting any updates, and seeing that video pretty quickly, because we were alerted within minutes of it happening, the silence was deafening. And I just knew, but held out hope that he survived, but knew that it was unlikely based on that. And then I heard from, again, some inside sources shortly thereafter that he had passed.
Crazy, crazy. I mean, I think what's obviously in the UK we got the news through that it passed away, and unfortunately in the UK, I think some of the coverage has been pretty shocking, in terms of a lot of the media outlets here. Some of the things, even just the basic commentary, of the way they describe Charlie Kirk, as somebody who's listened to his podcast, as somebody who's listened to him for years and years, the way they were describing was completely inaccurate or really false. And I want to know, how was it reported in America? Because I know some people in the UK, we've seen snippets of CNN's horrible reporting, but in general, how was it reported, his passing, and what's the reaction been like since?
Yeah, so I mean, look, the major news outlets here, the corporate media, they're in the bag for the left, and controlled by those who have global interests, and many of them are our foreign adversaries, people who are against traditional values. I mean, it's owned by them. One of the first reports, I think it was MSNBC here, which is one of the worst of the mainstream, had reported that they thought maybe it was a friendly fire or an accidental discharge. I mean, super ludicrous kind of statements that only someone bereft of all intelligence could ever even say. And again, Charlie is, vilified and hated by those people because he's made them time and time again the fool. And, he's done, many appearances on those shows and made them a fool. And, Charlie had a tremendous talent for very directly, very succinctly pushing back on the narratives that they were attempting to control. So, the rest of the world, knew pretty quickly, and were reacting, as we should. And everybody was in shock, and everybody was praying, and everybody was, talking about, what this was. People were knowing that it wasn't some right-wing white supremacist MAGA guy, but the whole entire internet was aflame with people trying to hijack and spread that narrative. They still are doing that because it was a a white kid from a relatively conservative family. They're ignoring the information that was released by the FBI and by the governor's office right away, that he had inscriptions on his bullets saying, "Hey, catch fascist." And this kid was wearing a T-shirt celebrating fascism. And it's been reported, I think yesterday, that he was the roommate of a trans-identifying individual. So it has all the appearances, and some kids that were familiar with him or knew him said that he was sort of a Reddit chat kid and spending time on some of those online forums that have been known for radicalizing these kids into a left-wing narrative. And, Charlie's the major target for them because he's speaking very boldly out against that, transgender identity issues and even the failure in the black culture and some of those things that are hard truths that need to be said. He's been saying, and so many people hate him, and as a result, I've been saying a lot on my show that. The words are violence crowd is what has led to this. People for years were saying words are violence. And the more you say words are violence and then you paint guys like Charlie as a fascist or a Nazi or, anyone who voted for Trump or wants to make America great again, as a fascist, far right, Nazi, tyrant, all of that. Then if you're saying words are violence and we're openly speaking out against bad or evil ideologies, then it becomes to them self-defense if they engage in actual violence. And that's where we went. And I have been saying that for 10 years, that this would lead to that kind of a thing.
I mean, you look at all the stats of all the shootings that have happened recently in America. I was reading before I chat today, and the amount that have come from people from the left is frightening. And I think that there is no doubt that by calling somebody a Nazi, you're dehumanizing them and you're giving, an excuse for these people to go and act the way they do. I think it's really sick and horrible. And I think what's really sad post the shooting is there are lots of people, I'm guessing in America too, but in particular in the UK, who didn't know Charlie Kirk that well, hadn't maybe watched his videos, but because of the way people reacted to his shooting, in particular on the left, they also adopted these positions or thought that he was far right. I mean, there was outright lies when even Stephen King, the famous author, posted outright lies
Yeah.
about what Charlie Kirk had said, and that had been accepted as the truth for a lot of people in the UK. So it was absolutely crazy, and I think that for me, I want to get your take on this. That for me is one of the most. Of course, nothing's worse than losing human life, but I think one of the really scary things for me is with this death is the reaction to it. The reaction to it for me has been it's been so frightening. The amount of millions of people have celebrated another man's death. For me, that is really quite scary. And I know, throughout history, we've seen influential people get killed and assassinated, but what worries me this time in particular is the reaction. I mean, what's it like being in America? Because in the UK, I've seen some pretty horrible reaction to it and people celebrating it. Is that the case in the States as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a worldwide phenomenon, and it should be frightening. Now, it's not surprising to me because I've talked about this for a long time. And Dennis Prager and Charlie and others, many of the influential and notable conservative commentators have said over and over again that they want us dead. And there's no more evidence than the celebrations they are having about Charlie's death. And a lot of it is see, this is what he gets for spreading hate. You're right, Stephen King. I watched that one happen in real time because he came out and said, "Oh, Charlie said that he thought gays should be stoned to death." Now, forget the fact that there are gays within the Turning Point organization. Now, Charlie shares a Christian perspective that homosexuality is wrong, and that is the perspective that has been held in Christendom forever. It's not really controversial. It's only controversial in this time. But what Charlie has done is TPUSA was a political organization that allowed people who shared our politics, and we can have differences. I can believe and I can have gay friends, and I do, who know my stance and know what I believe in terms of marriage and all those sort of things, and we're still friends, and we can be friends, and we can have political discourse, and we can disagree. Charlie never said that they should be stoned. It was a egregious lie based on a conversation that he had about the Bible. And they've done that on a bunch of those things. There's a whole list of things that people are putting out, and I'm sure you've seen it, that is like, well, Charlie believed this, and therefore he's an evil man. And almost every single one of those is a bold-faced lie. A few of them are truths that the left does not like. And many of them are just differences in political opinions. But a whole majority of them are just outright defamatory lies.
I mean, some of the stuff I've seen, even with regards to some of the stuff he said towards black people, again, outright lies. There, I did something recently on one of the news channels in the UK, and it was discussing about discussing the impact of single parent household versus two parent households, and in the UK, the largest group of people who have a single parent household are black people from the Caribbean. So more than 60% in the UK grow up in a single parent household, and naturally, no matter what country you're in, that means that you're far more likely to go into poverty, far more likely to go to jail. You're going to have more difficulties working, blah blah. The list goes on. And I've seen Charlie Kirk say very similar things, a bit more linked with crime in America and a bit more linked with other things. But again, he's given cold statistics, and that's it. Whereas some of the stuff that I saw that he allegedly said about black people was completely false and complete lies. He made clear statistical analysis like anyone would do in any job or any profession, but that was really twisted in terms of what he had been saying. That was one example. There's so many of like that. I mean, how annoying is it for you as somebody who is a friend of this man, a person who's been involved in, a senior position in one of his, organization? How frustrating is he when you see these outright lies get adopted by hundreds of thousands of people?
Well, it's incredibly annoying to me, but you know who it really is annoying to? The black and Hispanic and gay and everything else that people who are in the TPUSA organization and supporting Charlie's work. It's super annoying to the Brandon Tatums or the MAGA Hulks or the Candace Owens who he gave her start. I mean, it's incredibly annoying to all of them that know that Charlie was speaking the truth about a broken black culture. That Charlie was very outspoken in saying what I've said a lot, which is the black family was destroyed by Democrat policies.
Yeah.
The black family was destroyed by Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood. The black family was destroyed intentionally. They traded one form of slavery for another. They should have listened to Malcolm X and not Martin Luther King, who Martin Luther King Jr. sold them down the river. It is really, I think, truth and not that controversial to say that they should have listened to Malcolm X, who said, "Beware of the white liberal." Because it's the white liberal and their effed up policies that caused fatherlessness in black homes to rise dramatically, and wreck their businesses and wreck the stability that they once had. And Charlie boldly spoke about that. And of course, they're not playing the videos in any kind of entirety or context. They're not playing the videos, which there's one great one that's circulating around where he talks to a black mother who's standing there in line and talking to him. And they had a great and enlightening conversation. And I think he changed her life there. That there are problems within cultures, and there's problems within white culture, black culture, brown culture. It doesn't matter. There's things that we could all do better. And the first step to it is conservatives preached the idea of taking personal responsibility and cleaning up our own rooms. And those are the sort of things that Charlie emphasized. And Charlie did emphasize the broken homes that led in Black culture to a culture of violence, a culture, gang violence, a drug violence, all of those sort of things that need to be repaired.
I mean, exactly that. And I think for a lot of us, again, watching Black Lives Matter fold, and one of, they are a political organization. You go on their website, you can see the manifesto, and one of the things there is, the destruction of a nuclear family. And I think that kind of sums up how horrible and what kind of messaging that sort of sends out. But the reason I also bring up Black Lives Matter in particular is, look, when George Floyd died in the US, the reaction was worldwide. It caused riots in the UK, across the globe. Buildings were burned. UK got absolutely nothing to do when it comes to George Floyd and when it comes to your police system, good, bad, whatever. But it caused such a big upheaval in the UK. We had our football games, soccer games. Every game, Black Lives Matter was plastered everywhere. We were kneeling in almost every sporting event, and this was in the UK, again, unrelated. But the riots were pretty bad in the UK. This happened during COVID when we were told to stay at home. And again, it was fine for them to be rioting and protesting. And what I'm trying to say is the double standards, because what I've seen really proudly and really nicely of fellow conservatives is that reaction has not happened remotely for Charlie Kirk. From whatever I've seen, it's been people praying, it's been people mourning, it's been very peaceful and very calm. Yet the coverage does not show that on any of the media outlets. We're still talking about far right, and we're still talking about the repercussions. Again, why is that happening? Because the fury we saw with George Floyd was absolutely crazy, and people were demanding legislative changes. People were demanding all sorts of things in the US in particular. But with Charlie Kirk, that doesn't seem to be the case. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, because it was manufactured on the George Floyd side. Remember, if you understand what COVID was, and the massive transfer of wealth that happened during COVID, all of those sort of things, that was an intentional distraction to keep us divided so that we could be fleeced by global enterprise. And we saw that happen before our very eyes. George Floyd was a unrepentant criminal who put a gun in the belly of a pregnant woman, who was counterfeiting a $20 bill, died of a drug overdose. Derek Chauvin had his knee on his back and shoulders up to his neck, according to department policy. And Charlie spoke out against that. I spoke out against that. He was falsely and politically imprisoned for doing something that his department trained him to do. That's great wickedness. They intentionally only showed part of that video. That was very intentional. George Floyd was sitting in the automobile, sitting in the police cruiser in the back in cuffs, saying that he couldn't breathe and asking to be put back down on the ground. And they did that. I'm not saying that there weren't mistakes made, but he wasn't certainly killed because of a racist police officer. That narrative just was simply not true, and it was ginned up by our media. The left tells on itself by not boarding up all of the cities right now. They know that the right does not have that violent bend to it. We are not chaos. We are order. We are not taking to the streets and burning cars, because that is not in our DNA. It is not a value that the right holds. We'll defend ourselves. We will fight in wars. When it comes down to it, if you were to line up the left and the right would win every single time. They're all paper tigers, and they're all, wimps. And the words "our violence crowd" only say that because they've never actually experienced any violence.
Yeah.
And the truth is that they will take a few isolated crazies, because we have them on our side, And there's a great meme and image going around with a bunch of hash marks, and it's the left wing, and it's all the violence that the left wing commits. And then there's a couple of hash marks up here in the corner, the narrator is going, see, there's no difference. Look, we all have crazies. We all have knuckleheads. We all have stupid people. We have people that'll do dumb things on both sides, but it is not in the DNA of the conservative movement or the MAGA crowd to commit violence or burn the streets.
Definitely. And going to that point of violence on the left and right, I've it'd be interesting to get your take on this because I saw something earlier on today with regards to the amount of shootings that have happened related to either trans people or supporters of the trans movement. Now, we had a podcast on here. I know he recently went on Joe Rogan, Graham Linehan, who is a UK Brit comedian. He wrote lots of shows, very famous in Britain. And he essentially got banned from Twitter before Elon Musk took over. He's been arrested. He's been all this sorts of a normal, just a normal man, not political at all, but was very much a man as man, woman as woman many years ago, and has had all sorts of prosecutions against him since. But he on this podcast made a whole. He gave a whole speech, and it was very interesting about how he sees a lot of the LGBTQ movement being linked towards it being essentially predatory. Like there are elements of that movement now that are going more and more further away into the predator element and mentally unwell, and that was kind of what he was really pushing towards. In the US, this clearly seems to be playing out much bigger, considering what I just said in terms of the shootings with trans. Is that something that's being acknowledged in the United States of America at the moment? Because there seems to be at least some sort of trend here with shootings and the sort of trans ideology or people supporting it.
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, there's a link. What we're talking about is, the trans movement is filled with people who are destabilized mentally. Up until 5 minutes ago, it was a mental health condition if you thought you were in the wrong body. And then now it's something that was not just celebrated, but became encouraged. And you're talking about putting people on, very intense hormonal cocktails. And many of the people that are committing the violence, not all of them, but many of them are men with autogynephilia, men who get sexual pleasure from dressing up in women's clothing, going into women's spaces. I mean, it is a known sexual deviancy. That's the pleasure that they're getting from it, and you're not allowed to say that. And Charlie did, which is why he was vilified and hated by that crowd. There's evidence that the radical trans movement, there's groups that the FBI is looking into. Some of it, this assassin. There's some suspicions and some evidence that he was on a Discord server that included many of those folks. And again, his roommate has been reported to be, of that ilk. And so, we're talking about, that they're openly wearing T-shirts with AK-47s and rainbows on it and saying, F around and find out kind of stuff. So we're talking about a movement that is getting increasingly extreme and violent. Again, you have Gavin Newsom and people out there that for years were saying they just want to exist, and as if we don't want them to exist. They're accusing us of a genocide on a people group because we're saying that kids shouldn't be put on puberty blockers, which is a rational and responsible position to take. It is evil to tell a child that happiness lies on the other side of puberty blockers and genital mutilation. They've been preying on young girls who were confused during puberty. Many of them were on the spectrum or autistic or dealing with other mental issues, and they're being told that, well, it must be because you're really secretly a boy, and then they're putting them on hormone blockers and encouraging top surgery. We're in an evil, fallen world, and it's only getting worse.
And the thing with the trans, interesting with the LGBTQ movement, some of the most anti-people I've met on this movement are gay people, and I've always been surprised by that.
Yeah.
Now, not much. They are some of the most anti-trans people. They hate being associated with the same movement as them. Some of the ones that the most some of the most anti-trans people I've met have been gay people, and I think that's really funny or interesting how the Democrats and the left completely ignore that side of the argument. What is the trans status or that movement status in the US? Because in the UK, a few months ago, there was a ruling, a Supreme Court ruling, which essentially was saying that a trans man is not a woman, and only a biological woman is a woman. There's still a lot of pushback from authorities in the UK, where some people are deciding not to go with the Supreme Court rulings. Some are getting sued and blah blah. But it seems to be anyway in the UK going into a much better direction. How about in the US? What's the status of that?
Yeah, we're a little behind you guys. There is a vibe shift which is happening right now where people are starting to recognize and talk against it. Before, if you said anything, I mean, this happened to me. I had clients called. I had business associates attacked. I had, people, coming after me and my businesses because I said just that one statement alone. That was the only thing I posted at the time, that kids should be put on puberty blockers. And I philosophically, I've changed my mind a little bit on this, but philosophically, I kind of think, okay, do whatever you want to do as an adult. And if you want to, cut your willy off, fine, go for it. But I think now most of that stuff is it's just too evil, and doctors and medical establishments should not be engaging in any of those practices. The more I learned about the sexual deviancy behind it, the more I learned about the mental health condition itself, I've changed my position. But it's meant to destabilize the family, and so that's why it has been something that's been pushed so long. It takes political power away from the smallest form of government. If you can tear up the family, you can reduce. Again, the most important form of government that pushes back on these sort of things. The tide is turning, though, and people are now more willing to speak out. People aren't as afraid anymore. There's been legislation here in certain states. There's been, some federal legislation proposed and executive orders that have been put out to, limit that. But it's a very powerful lobby, and a lot of the doctors that got into it recognized that it was $1 billion industry. You're making subscription patients for all time. I mean, there's an endless, anybody who does any of those surgeries or goes on puberty blockers, I mean, it's a lifelong sentence. It is not something that you do once and your body just deals with it. No, it's a lifelong process.
It's just crazy how far that movement's gone, in particular across the West, in particular, because you go outside of the West, this isn't something that's ever talked about. And sometimes I do genuinely think that other countries almost laugh at us, US, UK, and they must think, we're so distracted with all of this sort of nonsense, whilst other countries are just focused on growing their economies and getting stronger in all sorts of areas, whilst we're debating what a man is and what a woman is, when that's never been the case before. How has this administration, the Trump administration, reacted to the Charlie Kirk news? I know I've seen stuff and heard stuff that he was particularly close with JD Vance, but how's their response been to his passing?
Well, I mean, Charlie was very close to the president as well. Charlie had the president's back. Charlie never wavered in his support for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was very loyal to Charlie. So there's been honors and, all across the administration for Charlie. He's being treated, as if he were a head of state, which was, really wonderful for all of us to see. JD Vance and Charlie were particularly close because it was Turning Point USA that largely helped to get him elected to the Senate. He was someone that we supported very early on, and nobody lobbied harder or more effectively for him to be chosen as Donald Trump's running mate than Charlie Kirk. Charlie personally spent time lobbying intensely for him as the right choice for VP, and he was. and he remains really a superstar in that administration, and he was a good choice, and Charlie made that happen.
How did Charlie see that? Because you know, maybe it's me being ignorant in the UK, but JD Vance didn't have necessarily a massive profile when he became VP. It wasn't that, there was plenty of other more well-known, especially in Britain, candidates than JD Vance. It came across as a massive shock to a lot of us here. What did Charlie Kirk see and Turning Point in general see in it? Well, it's clear now that JD Vance, now we see him and we see what formidable person he is. But what was it, the early signs that triggered the initial point where you guys decided and thought this person could be vice president and maybe president one day?
Well, I mean, what Charlie saw is what a lot of us saw. Aside from J.D. Vance's talent, he was an outsider, right? He wasn't an establishment shill. He wasn't, a lifelong politician wrapped up in that, permanent Washington bubble. He wasn't someone that was, there lusting for power in that way. We've had some great success with some candidates that we've gotten elected to higher office, including Anna Paulina Luna, who's been fabulous, who's been a consistent truth teller. The people that TPUSA supports, we want to be America First candidates who want to see America as a sovereign country in charge of its own destiny again. And J.D. Vance was that. And J.D. Vance, and all of our dealings with him behind the scenes, was one of the most, dedicated to those principles, but also could communicate better than most. I mean, Charlie set an exceptionally high bar in direct, straightforward, clear delivery of truth. And J.D. Vance does a great job with that as well. And I think Charlie saw very early on that he would be unshakable in that pursuit, and did a really great job. And again, the evidence is right there in what he's done since the campaign.
Definitely, definitely. I do want to get your take on who do you, the next president, who do you think it is and how it's going to work. But going just back to Charlie, I've seen, I don't know if there are rumors or if there's actually any evidence behind this, but there was lots of suggestions saying that Charlie was considering or thinking of going into politics, going into maybe being a senator or something. Is there any truth in that, or is that just?
There's always those sort of speculations all the time. What people were recognizing is a couple of facts. Charlie was the most powerful political personality in the country who was not in politics. There's nobody that even came close. There's nobody that was the kingmaker that he was. There's nobody that had an army like Charlie had. I mean, I don't know how much you guys know about this in the UK, but it was Turning Point USA that deployed all of the ground forces to get Donald Trump elected by, the margins that he did. We had hundreds of people in all of the battleground states on the ground, pulling the low propensity voters in and getting voter turnout like never before. I mean, there was very few bigger heroes than TPUSA in that, and the Trump administration handed that responsibility to TPUSA, and so that alone, I mean, Charlie had a machine. Think about it this way: all of the young people that are coming out of high school right now, who are trending to be more conservative, Charlie is responsible for that. Charlie set the tone for that. So had Charlie decided in 2028 that he would accept a nomination as vice president, that ticket would have been unstoppable. If Charlie decided, I mean, he's 31, almost 32 years old. If he decided, in a few more years after that he wanted to ascend to the presidency, I don't think there would be anything stopping Charlie. But that being said, when I had private conversations with Charlie behind the scenes talking about that, because I had identified it, Charlie, you were going to be set up. And by the way, he had a tremendous ability. I mean, he learned how to build a coalition. He learned how to build staff. He learned how to build, loyal people who he could delegate responsibilities to, and he would let them do their work. And you know, there's no bigger and more difficult position than President of the United States from an execution standpoint. You have to be an executive of highest order. You can't just be a personality. Charlie had all of it and would have been unstoppable. However, like I was starting to say, behind the scenes, he was more interested in transforming America from within, transforming it on the college campuses, getting people philosophically to, you know, open their eyes and understand, you know, why America was great and why it needed to be great again, and, you know, get people to adopt our values. And I think, you know, we had a generational problem that required a generational solution, and Charlie was about that. Could he have won? Absolutely, without a doubt.
I mean, the impact he's had in, you know, being so young is absolutely crazy. So I think similar to yourself, I have no doubt if he really put his mind to it, I'm sure he could have definitely achieved what he set out to do. I mean, that's what makes this whole situation even worse in some cases with his passing. And I think it does really identify the threat of the left in terms of the violent stuff. I've got a sheet here where that some of the going back for the last 8 years, there's more than 30 either assassinations, stabbings, assassination massacres, assassination plots, murders, attacks towards Christian schools. It is absolutely absurd. Is this now? Is it identified that USA has a far left problem in that there is actually likelihood of regular threats of violence? So this is actually a serious problem. You know, the president that was shot a few months ago. You've had the most influential political speaker there is in terms of Charlie Kirk passed away. We're also getting shot. Is it been identified? Because I feel like if this was the other way around, there would be a lot more maybe coverage and a lot more talk about the threat of the far right, for example. But has it been identified? Is it like, is everyone in unison that USA has a serious far left problem?
Well, they don't want to admit it, right? Because for years they were talking about the far right and the far right extremists. You know, we had the previous administration identifying through the FBI that was the great threat was going to come from the far right, and they juked statistics to try to make that you know, appear to be the case. I mean, they worked double time to make that appear the case. They were putting FBI agents undercover in Latin Catholic masses and trying to identify, you know, this up and coming domestic terror that's going to come from right wing personalities. I mean, it was absurd because again, it isn't in our DNA the way that it is in the left, and we're. Unfortunately, I mean, I was predicting it. I was talking about this. I was talking about the temperature rising to this point. I made this prediction, you know, years ago, again, using that words or violence thing. I was telling people again and again on my show, that's why they're saying this. That's why this narrative is out there. That's why they're pushing these people. That's why they're calling everybody Nazis and coming out and saying it's okay to punch a Nazi, or would you kill Hitler if he was young? You know, all of those sort of things were something that they perpetuated really, really hard. So we have a problem. I think we know we have a problem in upper echelon of conservative circles. I think we're all on the same page recognizing this, and many of us knew this was a threat. Again, there's almost no security need for left-wing figures. Now, outside of, you know, billionaire tech titans and things like that, but you look at the pundits, Chunk Uger, you know, doesn't need to run around with, you know, 4 or 5 full-time security personnel. You know, most of the, left-wing mouthpieces don't need to have, I mean, they might have some personnel, but they don't need to have, you know, massive security budgets. The right-wing guys, I mean, Charlie was truly one of the most peaceful dudes out there. And if you watch his videos, he's not, you know, what's his name, Myron Gaines, ridiculing people who come to his table. Charlie was attempting to persuade and spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ, but yet he was vilified, again, routinely threatened. There were so many things that went on behind the scenes that nobody knows about in terms of how many, daily death threats Charlie Kirk got. That doesn't happen on the left.
It's fascinating you saying all this stuff because I don't think many people, I for certain didn't. I presumed he would have death threats of some sort or some every now and then. I had no idea that it'd be as frequent as you're saying, and obviously it's going to be coming from the left. Did he ever feel fearful of his life? I know there's been a few videos going around where he describes what he wants to be remembered as, but I didn't read too much into it. Everyone gets asked that question every now and then, but was there any fear in him?
Charlie really did not have a fear because he knew, where he was going. He was so committed to his faith. He was really at peace with that. I remember, us talking about close protection things, and he's like, "No, if somebody's going to punch me, let them punch me. I can take a punch." He's like, "That'd be great content. I'm not worried about taking a punch." He was worried about getting shot or stabbed, but not fearful about it. He didn't take unnecessary risks. We had good security teams surrounding him. God bless those guys. Those guys right now we're close to him, traveling with him forever. They were very competent security guys. I mean, the loss to them, both professionally and as a friendship, is so dramatic. I mean, I know those guys personally. I haven't reached out yet personally because I know what they're going through right now. But these are good dudes, loyal dudes. It's despicable to see the online conspiracy people, trying to say it was inside jobs and things like that. I mean, these are guys that were with Charlie every day, knew him, loved him, handpicked. Guys that have worked for Charlie, for many years now, insanely loyal, competent guys. But the truth is that you would have had to have a Secret Service level protection details with advanced teams, counter snipers, guys on the surrounding roofs all the way around, drones, multiple day, advanced surveillance. I mean, things like that in an open air space like that. This was the risk that Charlie knew he was taking. And, he always talked about he knew where he was going, and he was in God's hands.
How, you mentioned it a few times there. How important was his faith to him? Because it
Oh, it was
seems,
everything to him.
because one of the things we've been talking quite a lot on this podcast is the importance of faith, and I'm going to go back to the trans thing, and I look at a lot of the trans movement, the climate movement, as almost religious like cults. I look at those as often those people. If you look at the trans movement and a lot of some of the climate movement, it essentially is a religion in some ways, but just without any forgiveness. And you could argue that they've replaced religion in some ways for a lot of these, especially left-leaning people, as opposed to just having religious beliefs. Is that the case? I'm guessing similar in the US.
Yeah, for sure. You have to remember one thing, and I think people want to pretend that we could be without religion, and that is not true. You will have some religious ideology reign supreme in a culture, even if it's just secular humanism. There is no better religion to reign supreme in a culture than Christianity. It provides for the most freedom for all others. It provides for the most freedom of every other religion out there. And we need to keep in mind that those movements are just as religious in their fervor, and they have their own sacraments. They've got their own traditions. They've got their own holy sites, and I mean everything. It's really unbelievable. You cannot pretend that we can live free of religious ideology. It just is impossible.
I mean, it's been so good talking to you, Bryce. I wish we could carry on further. I know you're conscious of time.
Hey, let's
Uh,
do it again.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. We haven't even got to speak about your podcast, some of the stuff that you do. Which yeah, we should definitely do it again at some time. But we have a closing tradition on a show where I ask the guests for an unpopular opinion that you think should be popular. So it can be something we discussed. It can be completely different. But yeah, just an unpopular opinion.
Yeah, so there's this idea right now of the woke left, of course, but also the woke right. And I believe the woke right is dangerous in one sense, and that is, and Dr. James Lindsay, who's a friend of mine, has been really beaten up about this, but he talked about it on my show, and I hold his opinion in that we want maximum liberty in the United States. I do not want people under the auspices or the techniques of Marxism to rule me from a left wing or a right wing perspective. And there's a big movement that, okay, now that we are in charge, us conservative types, we're going to, enshrine in law all kinds of things to limit people's freedom and their liberty, but we're just going to do it from a right-wing perspective. I didn't fight against the left to get Donald Trump into office to just trade my left-wing masters for some dopey right-wing masters either. And that, when you talk about that and you talk about Christian nationalism and some of those sort of things that I know Charlie also pushed back on, you can become unpopular and you can get attacked for it. But I do not want a woke right master. I don't want a woke left master. So, that's probably my thing I'd leave you with.
I mean, the thing is, it's a great point because you could argue the UK, we had a conservative, I use that because conservative in name only, or you could argue for 20
Yeah.
odd years. And, they took away freedoms, they limited free speech, they've done a lot of
Yep.
stuff, and they were conservative. So I think that's a really
Yep.
good point to end on. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for
we're in
your
danger of happening that here. Yeah, well, thank you for your time. And yeah, if people want to visit me, I'm Super Bryce Eddy on Instagram. You can visit my show, bryceeddy.com, and sign up for my email list. I'm on Rumble and wherever else you consume podcasts, both audio and video. And then, yeah, if you want to see me get some brain damage arguing with people, I'm Bryce Eddy1 on X.
I'll definitely put all your links on in this bio of this episode so people can go find you and stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for
Awesome.
your time.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Thank you.